Okay, so today we're going to be building our own custom window. Uh, there's a lot of reasons why you might want to go ahead and do this, even if it's just a standard like fixed window or a casement or a double hung. A lot of times the stuff that comes out of the box in Revit isn't always built the best. I've just found that there are a lot of issues and things that don't work the greatest with the stuff that comes out of the box, which is unfortunate because it would be nice if they could give us at least the families that they actually provide us are actually fairly well built. That would be beneficial, but they seem to always be fairly stripped down and really basic sort of families. So we're going to just build a standard kind of fixed window with a grid pattern on it, but we're gonna make it parametric. We'll be able to, change widths, change heights, change the actual number of muntins in it, and everything in our project. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna come in here to families. We're gonna say new, and mine defaults to a weird location, but yours should end up looking something like this. So these are all of your family templates. We're looking for a window, so we're going to come all the way down to window. There's window with trim and curtain wall. I normally just go with the standard window. If I'm going to add trim to it and that sort of stuff, I'll do it in the standard window template. So I'm going to double click that, and it'll open up our window template for our window family here. So they have a default couple planes here. They've got the outside of the window on both sides, and they have a center line of the window right down the middle, and they have that kind of lock so that it stays in the center of the window. They also have a default width parameter in there, so we'll build our window at 3 foot, and then we'll be able to adjust this, and it'll all kind of move as we need it to. So the big thing about when you're building a window family, especially because window families can get a little complicated at times, is testing them out as you go. You don't want to try and build the entire thing and then go to test it out and all of a sudden things don't work. So as we go through this, we're going to test our parameters out, make sure things are locked where they need to be, and make sure things are moving the way that we want them to. So I'm going to actually model from the exterior side. So as I go to the exterior side, I see I've got some other default parameters built in here, like the height of the window has a default of 4 foot, and the default sill height of 3 foot is built in there as well. If for whatever reason you want to adjust these, so maybe you don't want a default height of 4 foot, maybe you want it to be 5 foot, you can come up here to family types. Up here it's this little like kind of 4 blue cubes. And this has all of your parameters built into it. So rather than height of 4 foot, you could punch in 5 foot and say okay, and it's just going to go ahead and make that change for you. But we'll work with it in kind of this scenario here. So we'll come up here to our Create tab. So you'll see that we don't have an Architecture tab since we're in the Family Editor, but we actually have a Create tab. And then we have a whole bunch of different tools than what we normally would. We've got all these kind of solids that we can create and use to create different kind of things here. If you're not familiar with these tools, I would recommend the video I've got on Model in Place and just the Family Editor. But we're going to kind of go through and use these. If you're not familiar with these tools, I would watch the other video to get familiar with them first and their basics before we kind of get into this. This is going to be more of just a focus on windows and creating the parameters and stuff that are necessary to make that sort of thing work. So I'm going to create a sweep, and I will say sketch a path, and I am going to go ahead and say pick lines, and I'm going to pick the exterior of the window there. And then I'm going to hit dimension, and I'm actually going to dimension from the sketch line to this reference plane on the outside, and I'm going to do that for every single one of these. And I know those say 0 foot 0, but the reason we're going to do that is once I click on these, I'm going to lock those in place. And that is going to ensure that no matter how much this height changes, how much this width changes, it's always going to keep that dimension of 0 foot 0 between the edge of my sketch and the edge of the window. So I'll hit my green check mark, and I'll say Edit Profile, and go to my floor view here. So I'm going to make this so that this is actually a window that can be placed in a brick or stone wall, so it'll actually sit back within the wall as opposed to sitting kind of flush with the outside, which most of the default windows in Revit all flush themselves up to the outside, and that's not really how they would sit in the wall. So I'm gonna come in, say, an inch, and then I'll go over. I'm gonna do just a pretty generic little kind of window sash here. We'll say we got a glazing half, and then we'll go something like this. That should work just fine. You don't want to get too overly complicated with this stuff. If you decide to draw in every last little tiny detail of it, that's fine, but you're going to make your window family a huge file that ends up, if you have a whole bunch of those windows in a project, it will start to bog things down because of how much geometry is built into each one of those windows. So this works pretty well here. I could set up various things here, so I'm actually going to set up a parameter here, so that 1 inch, I'm going to make a dimension there, so I'll be able to control how far back this sits within the wall. And then let's say I want this to always lock to the outside of the wall, so I'm going to lock that 0 foot 0. This is always going to be 1.5 inches. We'll say that sits 1.5 inches in. That's fine. That's always going to be the case. I'll lock that into place. And then I'll lock these into place. It's not always necessary to lock all of this stuff, but it does prevent problems later on when things start moving around here. So now that that's kind of locked in place there, if I wanted to set stuff up for the width here, so maybe I don't want this to be 1.25 inches, maybe I want to be able to control this, and maybe the inside that's 2 inches, or maybe this dimension here I want a thicker window frame. I could set something up there if I want to. I'm going to leave that kind of as is. What do I have there right now? I've got 1 inch. Maybe I'll bump this up to like 2.25, something a little bit larger. So now that I've got that, I want to deal with this 1 inch. I want to make this so that I can control that 1 inch and set it up so maybe it's 1/4 inch, maybe it's 2 inches or 3 inches, something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here in this label. If I do a pull down, I can see all of the parameters that are already in here, that height that we talked about, the width, and the default sill height. I want to create a new one, so I'm going to come over here and hit create parameter, and I'm going to name this window exterior inset. Now this can be a family parameter, it could be a shared parameter, just like it says here, it can be shared by multiple projects and families. It can be exported and can appear in schedules and tags. If this is something that you want to schedule, just throw that over onto a shared parameter that then you could select from a pull down when you're creating your window schedule. I'm not going to worry about that for this. I don't know that the brick inset for your window is something that you would ever see on a window schedule, so I'm not going to worry about throwing that on a shared parameter. The other things you have to worry about here are the name, obviously, that we already added, the group parameter, so where is this going to appear in the window family. So if you if you remember the properties that are over here, and then the edit type properties, there's these graphics, text, other, kind of where is this going to fall in that realm of things. And I'm going to throw it under dimensions because that seems to make the most logical sense there. And then, is it a type property or is it an instance property? So let's say I have a building that is going to be using a brick facade in some locations, a stone facade in others, and then maybe it's some sort of siding or like board and batten or something like that in another location. So if I make this particular parameter a type parameter, for each of those different cladding types, stone, brick, siding, I would have to duplicate this window and create a new one, even if it's this same window size, so that I could change this. And I don't know that I want that many different window types of the same size. This is something that I could change on a window-to-window basis rather than a whole project every 36-inch wide by 60-inch tall window I want to change it for. So I'm going to throw this on instance. And I tend to default towards instance parameters rather than type parameters. The reason for that being instance parameters give me more flexibility. And as I've probably said 1,000 times now in other videos, I always default towards more flexibility as opposed to not. I can, if I want to change this for every single 36-inch wide window in my project, I can always right-click, select all instances, and then change it, and it changes it for everything. If I want to be able to change it for just this one window, and it's on a type property, I can. If I have it on instance property, I can. So that gives me the flexibility of changing an individual window, but also every single one of those windows in the entire project if I want to. So as you can see, once I hit the instance, there's the reporting parameter here. It says can be used to extract value from a geometric condition and report it in a formula or as a schedulable parameter. So if I don't want to do this as a shared parameter, but I still want to use it as a schedulable parameter, I could click this and make it something that's schedulable. You can also generate formulas and things like that that impact your entire project. I've never really gotten into that side of Revit a whole lot. I know some people use it a lot. It's not something that I've delved into a whole lot, so I can't speak to that with a whole lot of knowledge. But I tend to just leave this off, especially for something like this. The major schedulable parameters that I need are, your width, your height, your rough openings, and some text things that are kind of default. So I tend to leave this off. There are instances where you might want something like this. So I'm going to say OK, and you'll see all of a sudden it gives this a label. And whenever there's a text label on something, that means it's a parameter that can be adjusted and changed. So I'm going to go ahead and hit my green check mark, and then hit my green check mark again, and that creates the solid for that. So now that I've created something that actually has an editable parameter, I'm going to go ahead and test it. So I'm going to pull this out and say, okay, this 1 inch, let's make it 1.5 inches, and hit apply. Okay, so that jumps back. That seems to work pretty well. Let's go to 1/4 inch. That works. Let's say we go 2.5. That jumps it all the way back. Great. Okay, so we've got a parameter here that works. So that's working fairly well for us now. And I do know that if I exceed that, and if this all of a sudden gets back into here, it's going to give me an error, and it's going to say that I can't create that sweep, which is fine, because I don't know that there's going to be a condition where, I'm going to end up wanting this to extend back like incredibly far. And if that's the case, then what I could do is I could come in here and say, okay, I'm not going to lock this dimension here. I'm going to let this whole piece float back and forth, but I want this to always be, at least a half an inch off of whatever this exterior face is. So that way, once this gets back to a certain point, this thing starts jumping back as well. So if I ever got a wall that was thicker than this one, and maybe I don't want this to be 2.5, maybe I want it to be 6 inches, I could make that 6 inches and make that jump back if I want to. So if we go to our 3D view, we've got our window working here. Seems to work all right so far. Let's make sure that when we change our width and our height, that everything is working there as well. So let's say we go down to 2 foot. Looks like it. Let's go up to 6 foot. Okay, so that works pretty well. And then we'll go 4 foot. Yep. And we'll go 2 foot. Yep. So everything seems to work just fine there. So now that we've got our kind of sash and frame in there, something else that we're going to want to be able to do that works dimensionally, but we want to be able to apply materials to it. We want to be able to kind of do some other things with it. So over here, I can select that solid and apply a material to it. I could apply a material right now in the material editor in the family. I don't care what material it is in this family editor. I just want to be able to actually change the material when it gets into my project. And to do that, I need to apply a parameter, which is this button right over here on the very edge. So right now, there are no material parameters built into the project. So I'm going to say new parameter, and I'm going to call this window frame. And I'm going to make this an instance property again, just for the flexibility. Maybe I change the color of my windows or something like that as I go around the building. It might, probably not, but you never know. And having that flexibility is always kind of nice. So I'll say OK, OK, and then it's going to gray that out because it has a material parameter associated with it. OK. So now that we've got that taken care of, we want to go ahead and deal with our glass. So if we come up here to our create and we grab our extrusion, we can create a rectangle that fits. I'm actually gonna kind of zoom in here, and I'm gonna grab the base of the frame there. So now that I've got that in place, I could do this one of two ways. Actually, we're going to do this slightly different. We're going to use this pick lines tool, because as I select this line, I can also lock it, and I can lock it to that particular line. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And that way I don't have to actually use the dimension and the 0 foot 0 and lock it in place. That does essentially the same thing. So then I'm going to say this is going to be, say, 1/4 inch, something like that. I'm not too worried about the exactness of how that's all going to work. But then I'm going to come down here and I'll go ahead and apply a material. I'll create a new material parameter and I'll call this the glass. And I'll throw an instance parameter on that and say OK, OK. Hit my green check mark that I've made now, and now I've got my glass pane. If I go into my reference level, it's not going to be probably exactly where I want it. So it's sitting out here. I actually want it back, back kind of sitting in this pocket here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the work plane that it's like kind of associated with, and I'm going to move this back into place of where I actually want it to sit. So that goes ahead and and takes care of that, putting that in place. I can throw a dimension on this and actually say, okay, there's the shape panel of that and the shape panel of that. Let's go ahead and just lock that into place, and then I'll say, okay, the 1/4 inch, I want to keep that at all times. So that works just fine. Now let's make sure that our glass is going to go ahead and move with everything else. So if I change the width, the height to say 7 foot, make sure we don't end up with like a line down here of where our glass pane is, and then we'll say 4 foot and apply that. So the locks that we created work. So we should be all good there. So we'll bump this back to 5 foot by 3 foot. Say OK. All right. So now we have a nice, like, decent window going here. Now we want to add kind of our muttons to it, or our divided light. This is where things get a little bit trickier and a little bit more in depth. So what we need to do is actually create what's called a nested family, and that's basically a family within another family. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and say File, New, New Family, and I'm going to go find my family templates. And I'm just going to make this a generic model. It doesn't have to be anything special or anything. I'm just going to say generic model works just fine for what I'm doing. Hit open, and now I've got this kind of crosshairs here. They're a little different. So I'm going to need to create two versions of this. I need to create a vertical mutton, and I need to create a horizontal mutton. So I'm going to go to the front view, and I'm going to say extrusion, and I'm going to draw, we'll just say I'm going to do a 1 foot, and let's say my muttons are going to be 3/4 of an inch. And I'm going to move that so that the center of that actually falls right in line with the center line of the actual family here. And then I'm going to say my muttons are only, we'll say they're 1/4 of an inch deep, something like that. And we'll hit our check mark. So now I've created a little 1/4 inch by 3/4 of an inch mutton here. So there's a couple things. Whoops, let's scroll until we get back to our mutton here. There's a couple things that I want to add to this so that I can work with it once I bring it into my my window family here. So I need to create a length parameter. So I'm going to call this, create a new parameter. Dimensions is fine. We'll throw an instance on it, and we're going to say this is vertical mutton length. Say OK. So that's good for that. Now I need to be able to also, basically I need a reference point for right down the middle of the mutton itself. So I'm actually going to create a model line, and there are other ways you can go about doing this. This is just the way that I've done it in the past, and it's worked for me, so I've kind of stuck with it. I'm going to create an invisible line, and I'm going to go from the top to the bottom and create this little invisible line there. And then I'm going to dimension from the very top there. I'm going to hit tab and grab the end of that line and lock it in place. And same thing with the bottom. And lock that in place. So now when I change the length from 1 foot to say 1.5 and hit apply, that line extends up and down with it. It just gives me a nice reference point to work with, and we'll see why I need that here in a minute. Okay, so now I've got my vertical mutton. I'm going to go ahead and save that, and I'll just save it on my desktop, and we'll say vertical mutton. So we've got a vertical mutton created. Now I'm going to go ahead and close this, and we'll create another new family. and grab another generic model. And then I'm going to go to the front, and I'm going to create a horizontal one of the exact same thing. And this I'm actually going to do it in the middle of the horizontal and the vertical here. So now I'm going to basically do the exact same thing as what I did with the other. I'm going to create a parameter that goes with this. So I'm going to come up here and create a parameter. I'm going to make it an instance parameter, and I'm going to call this horizontal muntin length. And we'll say OK. So we got that created, and we'll make that 1/4 inch deep. Okay, so now we need to create our invisible line here that goes through here, and then we'll throw our dimension line on the end there. Lock that in place, lock that in place, and then make sure that everything works. Say 1.5 feet. Looks like it. So everything jumped to one side, but that's not going to make a difference for what we're trying to do here. So that should work just fine. So I'm going to go up and save that, and we'll call this horizontal muntin and save that. Okay. So now that we've got that taken care of, we'll go ahead and close that out. Okay. So what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and load in our muttons here. We'll do the vertical muntin first. That's going to be our more complicated one, and then the horizontal muntin will be. Actually, we'll do the easier one first, and then we'll deal with the more complicated ones. So we're going to go to component, and there's none loaded in, so we'll say yes, we're going to load it. We'll go to our desktop, and we'll say horizontal muntin, and we'll open that up. So I've got this horizontal muntin. I'm going to click it into place, and then I'm going to move it in so that it sits right on top of my glass pane here. Move that over to one side. And now here's where things get a little different and a little interesting. So I'm going to go to my exterior, and I'm going to move this up into place where I want it. So I'm actually going to start with one that's right in the center. So I've got it on the center point of my window there, and I'm going to hit a dimension and grab the very edge of my frame, and I'm going to tab until I get to the very edge of my muntin, and I'm going to lock that to be 0. That way it's always going to keep that attached there. Now, as you can see, I'm not extending all the way over there. I need to get this so that, if you recall, my horizontal muntin length, I need that to be whatever this dimension is. But this dimension is always going to change depending on the width of the window. So how do I make it so that this is always going to, how do I make this width dependent on the width of the window itself? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out, okay, the dimension of my total frame here is 3.5 inches. So if the overall width of the window is, say, 3 feet, I've got to have my muntin length here be 3 feet minus 7 inches. The 3.5 on this side, the 3.5 on that side. So I'm going to create a parameter for horizontal muntin length, and I've got to create a new parameter within this family. So I've got one created for the muntin itself in that muntin family, but I have to duplicate that in the window family as well. So I'm going to create horizontal muntin length. I'm going to make it an instance dimension. Okay, great. So now this has a parameter built into the window family itself. So now if I come up here to family types, you'll see I've got horizontal mutton length here. I have the option of creating a formula over here that impacts what this is. So this formula overrides the text override here. So I won't be able to just input a number here. It'll automatically calculate that number based on whatever formula I put in here. So I know I want this to be the width, and I have to punch this in exactly how it is displayed here. So width minus 7 inches. So the width right now is 3 foot, 36 minus 7 inches ends up being 29. So that overrides that, and if I hit OK, now all of a sudden that jumps to where it needs to be, and it grows that direction because I've already locked this side in place. So I've got that taken care of. I'm good there. Now I want to make sure it stays in the middle here. If I all of a sudden grow this window and it grows 2 feet taller, is that mutton going to stay in the middle? Right now it does not, because if I change this to say a 7-foot height and hit apply, that grows, and see, it doesn't stay in the middle. So I want to go ahead and go back there. So I need to make sure that this stays even between there, and that's where that little invisible line comes into play, because I can grab a dimension line and then grab that invisible line in the middle and then grab that top portion, and I'm going to throw, this is considered a type of parameter. If I click on the equals, it makes it so that these dimensions are always going to be equal across there. So now if I go in here and change this from 5 foot to say 6 foot and hit apply, now that moves with it and it keeps that constantly in play there. So odds are, unless I have a very small window, at which point I probably wouldn't have, I might have a single horizontal, but most of the time I'm not going to have a single horizontal, so I'm not going to worry about the single horizontal. I'll show you how to deal with only doing a single mutton when I get to the verticals, because that's far more common than just doing a single horizontal. Most of the time I might have a single vertical and then multiple horizontals. So I've got that parameter set up there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create an array here. And actually, when I go to do this, I'm actually going to get rid of this equals parameter, because when I do multiple ones of these, I'm actually going to take care of this in a slightly different way. If you only have a single kind of division, this is an easy way to go about it. But since we're going to go ahead and take care of any number of muttons that we happen to have, we're going to do it in a slightly different way. So I'm actually going to grab this, and I'm going to move this down so that I make room for more of them. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and hit array, and I'm going to say, let's say I do 3, and move to the second one. So I'll say from here to there, we'll say like 9 inches. We'll bump that up to say 5. Not 5 feet, just 5. There we go. Okay, so obviously what we've got right now is a kind of uneven pattern here. We want to kind of even this all out. So to do that, I'm going to create a parameter from here to there. I'm going to grab a dimension there, and then I'm also going to throw it from the first one to the second one. Because when you're dealing with an array, the kind of host parent one can act slightly differently from the rest of them. So when I create a parameter on the first one, I need to associate that same parameter from the first one to the others as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab this, and I'm also going to throw a parameter on the array number. So if I take this, and once I grab this, I can come up here to label and say add parameter, and I'm going to say horizontal mutton number, and we'll say it's an instance, and I'm going to put this under Let's say we put this under graphics. And we'll say OK. So now we can control the number here. If I come up to my family types here, under graphics, I've got 5. I can bump that down to 4. I can bump that up to 6 if I want. I can control that back and forth however I see fit. So that's a parameter now that I'll be able to control within the project. Now I just need to make sure that they always space themselves evenly. So I'm going to add a parameter here, a new one, and we're going to call this horizontal muntin spacing. We'll say OK. And we're going to apply the same parameter to this one. We'll say OK. So you'll see it's jumping these up, and so once I've created this one, it's automatically doing it for the other ones and bumping all of these up to get that same spacing. Now I need to create a formula that will determine what the muntin spacing is dependent on how many there are. So to do that, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say, I'm going to need a wider array here to see. So horizontal muntin spacing. So to do that, what I want this to be is going to be the height of the window minus the 7 inches. So that's basically taking in the overall height of the window minus the frame. So how much glass space do I have? And then I'm dividing that by the, let's see, what did I call it? Horizontal muntin number. Horizontal muntin number. And then we want to divide this by the, not the number of muntins, but the number of muntins essentially plus 1, because that's the number of spaces between those muntins, if that makes sense. So I'm going to do horizontal muntin number plus 1, and we'll hit enter. And now it says, okay, now the horizontal, it's automatically calculating that to be 1 foot 1. So if I hit OK, now all of a sudden all this jumps, and I've got a nice, pretty even spacing there. And that works just fine, and everything should work how I want it to. So now let's test this out. Let's say we bump this up to 5 muntins and hit apply. They all go ahead and jump. It automatically changes my muntin spacing to what it needs to be. If I bump it down to 3, it automatically spaces them evenly. Everything works exactly how we want it to. Great. Now let's make sure that if all of a sudden I jump this up to 7 foot, does it still work? Yep. And if I change the width from 3 foot to say 3 foot 6, make sure that my muntins all jump. Okay, so you'll see, notice how all of these aren't staying where they need to? This one did, because this is the original. Remember how I said that the secondary ones don't always hold what the first one does? I need to just go in and lock that second one into place, and then all of them should fall in line. So let's back that up. And let's throw a dimension from here, and we'll tab through and grab the edge there and lock that into place. And now if I go to 3 foot 6 and hit apply, everything works just the way we want it to. Perfect. So horizontal muntins, we're in good shape. That one works exactly how we want it to. Now for the vertical. So we'll go into our reference level, we'll hit a component, we'll load our family, we'll load our vertical muntin, and we'll stick this right in place, right where we want it to be. And so now we'll go back to our exterior view here and move this up and into place where we want it. So we've got that. that in place, and we need to do the exact same thing that we did with the horizontal. We need to kind of lock it into place, so we're going to grab that and tab through and lock that. Now we need to set the vertical muntin length. I got rid of my properties window. There we go. Okay, so I need to grab my vertical muntin length and add a parameter to it. So I'll add vertical muntin length. Throw that on instance. Okay. All good there. Now I'll come up here, and under my vertical muntin length, I'm going to do the same thing as what I did for my horizontal muntin length. Except I'm going to use the height, so I do height minus 7 inches. So it automatically calculates that. I hit apply, it jumps up, everything works just the way we want it to. So now what we need to do is create the array, but we also need to have this work so that there is a single a single option in the middle. And when you create an array, an array of 1 doesn't work. For whatever reason, there's an error there, and it doesn't work the way that you want it to. So we have to kind of separate these things out into more than one vertical muntin and then one vertical muntin. So first what we'll do is we will make the more than one option work. So we'll go ahead and create the array the exact same way that we did for horizontals. So we'll grab that, we'll add a label to it, and we'll say vertical muntin number. And say OK. So we're good there. Now we need to create our spacing here between these. Whoop, didn't want to grab that. So we'll add our parameter here, and we'll say vertical muntin spacing. Okay. And we'll throw that on that one as well. And say OK. And I'm going to lock that second array down here, just like we did when we had the issue with the horizontals. We'll go ahead and lock that in place. That way all of my vertical arrays all work the way we want them to. Okay. So now we need to set up the parameter for, or the equation for the vertical muntin spacing. So we'll come in here, and just like we did the others, make sure we get this right. We'll say for this, we want the width minus 7 inches divided by vertical muntin number plus 1. And there we go, it grays out and automatically calculates, so we'll say OK. And that automatically tabulates that, so that should work how we want it to. So let's make sure that that all kind of works the way we want. So we've got vertical muntin number down here. Actually, now that I'm seeing this, I forgot to change my vertical muntin number to be in graphics, the same as horizontal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this and hit this edit parameter down here, and I'm going to change this and throw this in graphics. Hit OK. So now both of those will show up in the same place. So if I up this to 3, does that work? Yep. OK, beautiful. That's what we're after. All right. Now for the part where things get a little hairy. So we need to make this so that we don't get an error message if all of a sudden we go down to less than 1. But we also need to make it so that we can have a single vertical mutton. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a couple visibility parameters. So I'm going to click on the array here. So if I grab this and we'll say edit group, I'll grab this and say okay, the visibility here. And I'm going to create a new parameter that's just called array visibility. And we'll make that an instance and we'll say okay. And this I'll throw that under visibility. Say okay. So that should work for that part. And we'll say okay. So I'm going to come up here and finish this group. So I've got the visibility set for the array. Now I need to set the visibility of just a single mutton. So I'm actually going to create another mutton. I'm going to come down here into the view. I'm going to create component. Here's my vertical mutton. I'm going to stick that in place right down the middle. And let's go back to our exterior view here. I'm going to move that up into place. We're going to assign this the vertical mutton length parameter, same as before. We'll lock this into place. So that works just fine. So this is going to behave separate from our array. And I'm going to throw a visibility parameter on this. So that's the array visibility. This is going to be single vertical mutton. And we'll make that an instance. And we're going to throw that under visibility. We'll say okay. So I can turn the visibility of the vertical mutton on, and I can turn the visibility of the array on and off. The problem is I don't want to have to go through and deal with that each time. If there's a single vertical, I can click a button and make a single vertical, but I don't want to have to click a button, make a single vertical, then turn the array off, or have to deal with kind of the errors that might associate with it. So I'm going to go ahead and apply my equal distant parameter to that, so that way that one always stays in the middle. So we're good there. But now that I have those visibility parameters set up, I've got my dimensions here, and I've got my visibility down here. So what I'm going to do is my array visibility, I'm going to create essentially an if statement for it. And this works similar to Excel if statements. So the array visibility, I only want the array to show up when the single vertical mutton is not visible. So I'm going to say the array visibility is not, and then single vertical mutton. So that should work for the array visibility. So notice, because this is checked on, that automatically checked off. If I check that off, now that checks on. So that way these are working in tandem. Now I want this to show up when my vertical mutton number is less than 2. So I'm going to say we'll call this vertical mutton number, and I'll say less than 2. Okay, so right now, because my vertical mutton number is 2, that turns off, and then that automatically turns on. Perfect. But now I don't want there to be an error message here when that happens, because going to 1, now all of a sudden it behaves oddly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if, I'm going to say vertical mutton number is less than 2, then display 2, but if it's greater than 2, I want it to display the vertical muntin number. So that's basically just another kind of Excel if statement. So what is the condition? The vertical muntin number is less than 2. What happens if that is true? It'll display 2. But if that's not true, if it's less than 2, what do I do? Or if I'm greater than 2, what happens? Then I display the vertical muntin number. So I'll say OK. I'll hit apply. Whoops. Okay. So I create a circular chain because of all of these different things going on here. So I'm going to have to change. This slightly. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a new parameter here, and it's going to be an instance, and I will throw it under. I've got my muntin numbers under graphics, so I'm going to go ahead. The type of parameter is going to be a number. I'm going to throw it under graphics, and I'm going to call this vertical muntin. I already have vertical muntin number in there, so actually let's cancel this real quick. I'm going to change this from vertical muntin number to vertical muntin number array. Let's rename this number array. Say OK. It automatically updates that for me. So then I'll create a new parameter. I'll call this a number. This is going to be a graphics, and then I can call this my vertical muntin number. Same as that, and make that an instance and say OK. Alright, so what I am going to do, actually, I want that to be vertical muntin number, oh, it's not going to let me edit that. Let's delete that then real quick and create that again. So I want that to be vertical muntin number. This is going to be an integer. That's where I went wrong. Okay. So now it's an integer. I can increase this as I would the array. So I want the vertical muntin number, the array portion, I can't have that go less than 1. So I'm going to make this dependent on this. So I'm going to say if the vertical muntin number is less than 2, then this displays 2. Otherwise, make this the vertical muntin number. Vertical muntin number, note that parameter names are case sensitive. Let's see, vertical, whoops, muntin number. There we go. Okay, so my vertical muntin number right now shows 1. So that's going to default to 2. And then down here, my array visibilities, okay, it got rid of my formulas here, so I need to go ahead and readjust these. So my array visibility is not single vertical muntin. So if that is turned on, that one's turned off, and the single vertical muntin is only turned on if vertical muntin number is less than 2. There we go. Okay, so right now my vertical muntin number is 1, so that turns on the visibility of the single vertical muntin. If all of a sudden I bump that up to 2, the single vertical muntin number, so as soon as I bump that up to 2, there we go. So as soon as I entered that, now this turns off because it's not less than 2. And then as soon as this one turns off, this one turns on. And then if I go up to 3, this should turn to 3, because as soon as it says, okay, this is what's controlling, I bump that up to 3, now that goes to 3. And then all this stuff starts to change and adapt. Okay, so everything looks like it should be working the same way. And this is going to happen because we have the vertical muntin there for the visibility of the single. Whenever we divide it into an odd number, there's going to be one right down the middle, and it's going to say, oh, there's multiple things in the middle. We're not scheduling muntins, so I'm not really too concerned about it. So all of that works just fine. So we're going to go ahead and we'll create a new project. Browse for my template files. Why would it take me there? Imperial Library. Templates. There we go. Okay. So we're going to open up a file. We'll create a little wall here, and let's take our we'll take our window for a spin here. Load that into the project. Place that in the wall. Okay. What do we got going on here? So, we have... Let's throw this on realistic. Okay, so for whatever reason, our frame didn't come in, so we've created some sort of problem where the frame did not work. So, okay, so what I think probably happened here is we've got too many kind of locked dimensions and constraints. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into this sweep, and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this 1.5 inches here, and because we've got a constraint here, we've got a constraint there, we were constraining that plus this to there, we might just have too many constraints and it's having a problem dealing with it. So if we finish that and we say load into project, we override, and there it is. Perfect. Okay, so now we've got a window that's working for us. We've got something that's sitting back in there and seems to be basically what we want. Okay, so now that that's kind of solved, we can go in and start to play with this and see if we can get things to work the way we want. So I'm going to come in and I'm actually going to throw a glass material on here just so that we can kind of see it as a window, so we can see through there. Okay, so now that I have this selected, all of these parameters and everything that I've got set up should work pretty well. So horizontal muntins, let's go ahead and drop that down to say 2. Okay, that works. Verticals, let's go up to 4. Let's go all the way down to 1. That works. Perfect. And then if we go to edit type, we say the height, let's say it's 6 foot, and apply that. Everything seems to work. Let's go to 2 foot width and apply that, and that works. Great. Okay, so our window seems to be working pretty well, and let's say we want that window inset. So right now we're seeing, like, if this was a brick window, we'd actually see some of that brick wrapping to the inside. Maybe we want the 2.5 to be only 1.5 inches, and we apply that and it jumps. Perfect. So there is a pretty decent kind of custom window family that does quite a bit for us all in one. It's just a fixed window. It's got the muntins. We could even set up visibility parameters for the muntin themselves. So if we wanted to use this window family without the muntins, we could just check a box and turn muntins off entirely. We could do something like that, so that way this window is even more versatile. We can also use this in brick and stone exteriors and actually have an inset for it, and kind of set the window back off of the face of the exterior. So it seems to work pretty well. So in it wasn't quick, but we got through it in a fair amount of time, and now we have a window that we can use for a lot of different applications, and it works well, and we know how it was built. So if we ever need to modify or change it getting into the family, we're not going to run into problems or circular chains or anything like that we might run into with somebody else's model. So that's building a custom window.